This is AM Agenda. With me now, Labor frontbencher Nick Champion and Liberal Senator Zed Seselja. Zed, you've heard some of the discussion already this morning. I know Alan Tudge is doing his best to steer this back on to where the government wants the overall narrative, but the Prime Minister himself accepts that he was responsible for the distraction this week.
Well, look, he has made comments about that in terms of, how he's always going to look to do things better. But Alan Tudge is right, and Tony Abbott's right. The focus of the government is not on these kind of distractions. It is on growing jobs. It is on not just what we've been able to achieve with things like getting rid of the carbon tax and stopping the boats. It's about building the economy and fixing the budget so that we can have a prosperous nation. So these things are very interesting for media commentators. I understand that, but they're not the focus of the government, and they don't reflect what the government is doing. Just yesterday, we saw the Prime Minister talking about domestic violence, putting that on the national agenda at COAG. That is the sort of thing that Tony Abbott is pursuing. That is the sort of thing the government is pursuing, and it's the sort of thing we'll continue to pursue.
Nick Champion, to you on this issue, has too much been made of an honour for a royal, the husband of the Queen, who remains our monarch, of course?
Well, I think it was a jarring decision. Most Australians believe Australia Day is for Australians and to honour people who have, I think, done, significant things for their local communities. That's really what we're looking for. And of course, Rosie Batty is a great example of that, of someone who's leading the charge against domestic violence and against the sort of very high levels of domestic violence in the community. So we want to focus on those things and not on the soap opera that is the government. I mean, this is a government, and it's not just this week, but it's been building for some time now, a government that, is sort of every day you read a new piece of gossip, mainly centred strangely around staff, this sort of West Wing phenomenon that's going on inside this government. And it's a great pity because there are serious issues for us to discuss. Industrial relations and jobs and how to help families and the future of our country. So we'd all rather be discussing those things, but of course Zed can't really point the finger at the media. These things are generated by the tensions within the Abbott government, and not least by some of the decisions that the Prime Minister himself has personally made.
And I guess further to that, there are Conservative commentators, a long list now, that have been very critical of the Prime Minister, people that the PM counts as friends, including Andrew Bolt last night, who was scathing of the Prime Minister on this issue.
Well, look, there's always free advice, and sometimes your friends will be critical of the decisions you take, but let's just put this in context. Those same Conservative commentators would, of course, be very pleased that we've abolished the carbon tax, that we've stopped the boats, that we're getting on with the very difficult task of budget repair and the job of growing jobs and growing the economy in our nation. So that's what we've been doing through things like free trade agreements and so many other achievements. There will be more achievements this year as we progress our agenda. And so,
does the Prime Minister need to issue a stronger mea culpa, that on Monday, when he addresses the National Press Club, that he's got to scrap the PPL once and for all, get rid of it because it jars with every other bit of your economic message? Well, as I put it to Alan Tudge, one of your colleagues this morning, suggested to me that the Andrew Bolt criticism would tip the balance against Credlin, that Peter Credlin, the Chief of Staff, would finally be dumped as a sacrificial offering, as Miranda Devine put it yesterday in her opinion piece.
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the business of responding to anonymous quotes. What I would say is we as the Liberal Party and as the government are a team. We don't get into the business of sacrificial lambs. The government works together as a team. There are always challenges, and there are challenges when you are doing a hard job, which is fixing the mess that we've inherited. But the last thing I would want to see, Kieran, is that we start scapegoating people every time there might be an error or a decision that some people don't like. There will be hard decisions. We've got an agenda. We've got an agenda of growing jobs and fixing our economy and fixing our budget. Scapegoating doesn't help anyone.
And I guess Labor's faced its own share of criticism from the media and elsewhere over the last couple of years. Nick Champion, you would feel some empathy for the Liberal Party at the moment, wouldn't you?
Oh, well, I think empathy might be a strong word, Kieran. But look, history is there for people to examine. We made some structural changes to prevent such occurrences happening again. But I think what the government's going through is somewhat more serious. What we see is a lot of navel gazing, and as I said, the West Wing phenomenon really going on within this government, and all of the gossip and media reporting and backgrounding that is associated about that, and the sort of triviality of the government's internal musings is contrasted by the seriousness of some of the decisions the country faces, and of course some of the reactionary policies that they're pursuing. Things like completely hacking into Medicare through a $7 GP tax, and these latest proposals to hack into people's wages. So there's some pretty nasty policy proposals out there on the table. They're the real cause of the government's troubles. But of course we see a government that's sort of mired in its own navel-gazing rather than facing up to those challenges.
I'll get you to respond to that, Zed Seselja. That's fine, but I also want to ask you about the ReachTel poll, the Channel 7 ReachTel poll, which had Malcolm Turnbull well over double the preferred Liberal leader to Tony Abbott, 45% preferred to Tony Abbott on 18%. Julie Bishop was on over 30% support as well. The Prime Minister's on the nose, isn't he?
Well, we saw these kind of polls a long time ago in opposition when people told us that somehow Tony Abbott was unelectable. Well, he absolutely proved those commentators and some of those polls wrong, and I've got no doubt he'll prove them wrong again in the future. What I'd say to Nick is that one thing you said there was right, and that is in relation to the seriousness of the issues that this country faces. But unfortunately, we've got a situation where the main opposition isn't taking those issues seriously. You're in absolute denial about the budget mess you left us, which is what we're trying to fix. Even when you talk about Medicare, you're in denial that we have a serious structural problem as we see a blowout from $8 billion to $18 billion, projected for $34 billion in Medicare. These are some of the serious issues we are addressing and seeking to address. But of course, all you've got when it comes to those issues is to vote no. And that's one of the fundamental problems we face as a nation. The opposition is being completely irresponsible as we address these challenges. All
right, let's go to Nick to respond to that before we move on. There is another issue I want to get to before we wrap up. Nick, to you.
Well, that's just not right. You can't make the bottom part of the community pay for and do all of the heavy lifting while you let the top end off the hook in terms of, well, don't interrupt me, Zed. I didn't interrupt you. You're hacking into the bottom end of the community. You're saying, don't have your penalty rates. You're saying, pay $7 to go see a doctor. And the problem is that these are counterproductive proposals that will make things worse rather than make things better. And you can't expect us, as the Labor Party, to not defend Medicare or not defend people's wages. We will do so, and don't expect our cooperation if you roll up with reactionary proposals. The reason why you've got such problems in the polls, the reason why you got this problem with the polls, and Abbott is an accidental Prime Minister, let's be honest about it, completely accidental, and people are now cottoning onto that and wishing for something else.
How can you be an accidental Prime Minister when you're overwhelmingly elected by the Australian
I want to move
people?
on.
That's ridiculous assertion.
Tony Shepherd, the chair of the Commission of Audit, has urged the government to explain the case for any cuts to penalty rates and the minimum wage. Zed Seselja, to you on this, it doesn't seem like the government would have much appetite to pursue such a difficult reform area. Certainly not in the short term. It probably is good that you've given yourself some breathing space till beyond the next election with that Productivity Commission review.
Well, there's a couple of things. Productivity Commission review is important. I don't see any case for cutting the minimum wage. But when we look at the issue of penalty rates, we have a real issue, particularly with youth unemployment. And so if I go and talk to my local newsagent who says he has to open on a Sunday, but he doesn't employ anyone on a Sunday because he has to pay something like $60 an hour under the arrangements he has. So he doesn't employ anyone. He works, or his family works, in the family business. That's not good for him. That's not good for those young people who are without a job, who, if they were getting, say, time and a half at $40 an hour, would absolutely jump at that chance. So this is a genuine discussion we need to have. Do we have a regime? And I'm talking about particularly where we expect people to work on Sundays. Industries like retail, industries like hospitality. It's head in the sand stuff to suggest that when cafes don't open because penalty rates are too high, that's a good thing.
Well, let's go to Nick Champion, because this is something that the retailers are saying as well, that the jobs growth, that jobs for younger people and others are being held back by the size of penalty rates. Do you see this argument, particularly in regional, outer suburban areas where it's just not viable for businesses to open? The jobs are being hurt as a result.
Well, Kieran, these claims have been heard many, many times before in the Industrial Relations Commission 20 years ago when I was working as a union official. They've been heard more recently in the Fair Work Commission, and they've never been found to have any merit at all. There is no relationship between penalty rates and employment. It's just a nonsense. No empirical relationship. And what happens is regularly these groups bowl up, and what they want to do is reduce penalty rates. This is all about reductions in pay and conditions. And that's what the Liberal Party want, and it's not reform when you want to take people's wages and reduce them. It's robbery, that's what it is. Not reform, just robbery. And you know, we've seen these groups roll up time and time again with these demands. It's ridiculous. There is no relationship between penalty rates and employment, and there never has been.
All right.
So these are things that have been tested by the Fair Work Commission.
Nick Champion, Zed Seselja, gents, we've got to go. Thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.